9:40 is the time. Announced about an hour ago, or the first dribs and drabs, migrants could be housed on disused ferries as parts of efforts to clear asylum seekers out of hotels. The Telegraph are reporting this, or they were the first this morning. Rishi Sunak is expected to declare as early as next week the beginning of the end of asylum hotels, which are currently being used to house more than 50,000 migrants at a cost of nearly £7 million a day, which is obviously really, really difficult and causing, as we've seen over the last few weeks, some consternation, to say the least, in local communities who have at times not been told about this and, sometimes irrational, sometimes perhaps rational concerns and fears. That's an argument. Tudor Etchell is an immigration asylum lawyer and volunteer at Channel Rescue. Tudor, good morning.
Good morning.
How many ferries have we got lying around?
I think that's beside the point, really, and the question I can't really answer.
Yeah, because, migrants could be housed on old ferries, so I suppose the devil's in the detail. How does this scheme sound to you?
Unfortunately, it sounds like another scheme by this government of covering up the sort of patches and massive holes that this immigration system has developed. Asylum seekers housed in hotels are already, families have been in hotels for, years, and children are staying with their entire, Afghan families, families of, people who've worked for the British forces in Afghanistan are in these hotel rooms for years on end and unable to access education properly, healthcare properly, and are further stigmatised and excluded from the community, which just has a greater impact on the NHS. And so rather than putting in money into proper housing, properly integrating people that are going to continue to come to the UK, there's this, very verbose, grandeur idea that is purely for the visual politics, right? How do we further marginalise these people?
I haven't got anything in front of me, Tudor, about in terms of detail about speeding up the application process, which would seem a really good way to get people out of the accommodation if that's what the government wants. What about speeding up the process? Nothing from the Home Office on that.
Well, unfortunately, there has been something recently. They've recently introduced these new asylum questionnaires in the hope that there's a quicker way of dealing with cases from countries where there's a very high success rate. However, they haven't employed any more caseworkers. The Home Office is struggling to employ caseworkers at the moment because the morale is so low there, the pay is so poor. Yeah. People aren't trained properly.
Right, what's the answer then, Tudor? Come on, you're as bad as I am when it comes to this hotspot policing and short, sharp punishments. I'm talking about this. I don't think that's going to work. I've completely given up any hope of nuisance crime being sorted out. That's me, cynical and don't feel like there's a solution. Give me a nice solution to the problem we've got in terms of the backlog and people coming here and people being drawn here and people getting in boats. Is there an overall Tudor Etchell solution?
There's a solution many organisations have talked about, and that is through the idea of safe routes of passage. The Home Office frequently cites certain examples, such as with Syria and Afghanistan, of being able to resettle people without them making dangerous crossings. However, those only work in very, very limited cases. But when they do, it's good. And the Home Office should invest in further, safe routes to resettlement, which will allow people to claim asylum outside of the UK, and if they are granted, then be allowed here, rather than, making dangerous crossings, which people will continue to do. This deterrent effect has been really well researched and shows that it just doesn't work because people will find a way. And then that talk of further investment needs to go into when people are here. As I said, people are going to continue to cross. Yeah. And so therefore, proper, adequate accommodation facilities need to be provided where, for example, people can access proper healthcare, so there's not diphtheria outbreaks like at Napier Processing Centre.
Yeah, well, where's everyone going to go, Tudor? Seriously, where's everyone going to go? How about local services? What about schooling? What about GPs? What about dentists? What about everything else that we've all kind of paid for and built in this country? What about, just where are people? Is there an amount of people a quota in effect that we can say, yes, we can take this many, but we really can't take any more than that? Is this 500,000? Is this a million people a year? What is this? Or do you believe in simply open borders, and if somebody fits the criteria for coming over, then fine, they can live with us, and that's all good? Because there's got to be a balance somewhere, hasn't there?
So there's a number of points you made there.
There is.
Let's start off with the first point about this presumed pressure on public services. I think the pressure on public services comes from them not being funded, people not being paid enough. I mean, we've seen the strikes amongst the public services.
If you add a whole load of people to a population, it stands to reason it's difficult to get into schools in certain areas. You've got to address those sorts of issues, Tudor. You can't just say, look, it's tons of years of austerity, whatever you're going to say. What are you going to do? What are you going to say to local people who are getting a bit cross?
I think you're going to say to people that are getting a bit cross that this government has that the issue is not people coming over. The amount of people that come over and claim asylum in the UK is a very, very, it's like 2 or 3% compared to countries next to countries where people claim asylum. Where people flee.
Yeah, like Poland.
And I think you're presuming that these local communities that have resisted these creation of processing centres rather than anything more humane are doing it on the basis of a provision of local services. Here in South Wales, in Llantuwt Major, they were going to build a similar kind of centre, and the local opposition, the local football club, Llantuwt Major Football Club, were like, no, we don't want the government bringing in these places that ostracize people, that lead to violence. I mean, we saw what happened at Folkestone with the firebombing. We saw what happened in Knowsley.
Yes.
By creating these sort of like facilities that people these asylum seekers are further ostracized and causes further violence in the community, which is not what anybody.
It's a big debate, and I'm glad we've talked this morning. Thank you very much indeed for your time and joining us on ABC. That's Tudor Etchell, immigration asylum lawyer, volunteer at Channel Rescue. Migrants could be housed on disused ferries now as parts of efforts to clear asylum seekers out of hotels.